In this episode, I share 6 lessons I learned from my recent trip to the Kennedy Space Center and doing a tour of NASA. Get excited because this is Tiny Leaps, Big Change. Welcome to another episode of Tiny Leaps, Big Changes, where I share simple strategies you can use to get more out of your life. My name is Greg Clunas, and in this episode, I want to dive into a recent trip I took to the Kennedy Space Center down in Florida, where I got to tour the NASA facility, see all the different rockets, learn all about what it's like to be an astronaut, and it just sort of left me feeling really inspired about the work we're doing here and looking at sort of the disciplines and the rules and the approach that the team over at NASA and that anyone sort of working in those high-level fields have to take that can be applied to our daily lives. So this is going to be a super interesting one, a little bit different, but I appreciate you being here and hanging out for it. Now, before we jump into it, I do want to talk about today's sponsor. Here's a fun fact. Lion's mane mushrooms have long been used by Buddhist monks to help with focus during meditation. Well, the team over at Four Sigmatic had the brilliant idea to take these mushrooms and combine them with 100% organic Arabica coffee beans. It has 0 sugar, 0 carbs, and 0 calories. It's organic, vegan, paleo, sugar-free, and dairy-free. And the absolute best part, it leaves you feeling awesome. Seriously, I've had this coffee basically every day since I've gotten it. It's become a critical part of my afternoon coffee routine. And it leaves you feeling natural. There's this like buzz that comes from it that doesn't feel like it's overbearing or too much the way that regular coffee does. It's just this like natural, focused, in control energy. And it even comes in these really easy to use packets that you can bring with you anywhere. Just heat up some water, rip open a packet, pour, mix, and you're good to go. Now, of course, we have a special offer just for Tiny Leaps Big Changes listeners. Receive 15% off your Four Sigmatic order. Just head over to foursigmatic.com/tinyleaps or enter the code TINYLEAPS at checkout. That's Four Sigmatic, FOURSIGMATIC.com. foursigmatic.com/tinyleaps to receive 15% off your order. Okay, so like I said in this episode, I want to talk about 6 key things that I sort of took away from my time at the Space Center down in Florida. 6 things that again, these are just sort of based on my impressions, but 6 things that the engineers, the astronauts, the entire team behind our exploration of space, behind the moon landing, behind SpaceX and sort of what they're doing in the commercial world of space travel, all of that stuff, the team and what they've sort of had to build their career and their lives around in order to give it meaning. And I think there's real value in how they approach things because their work is so, there's no clear end, right? Like they're not going to see the end goal. It's very unlikely that anyone working and doing the training right now is going to be the first person on Mars, is going to be doing back and forth trips to Mars. So they're not necessarily seeing the end result of their goal. And not to mention, that end result isn't even the end result. So I wanted to do this episode to sort of explore some of the mental approaches to their work that they've had to adopt in order to give it meaning, with the hopes being that you can adopt some of these yourself and give your own work meaning. Now, the first one is sort of what we've been discussing here, is that the astronauts, the engineers, they recognize and they accept that the work they are doing today, they will very likely never see the end of that work, right? The goals they have set, as far as the long-term goals, are probably out of reach. Now, here's what I mean. If there's an engineer working on a ship design that can better handle the heat of reentry into the planet. That engineer is working on that particular piece, but that piece may be used for the Mars mission, or it may be used or it may be a part of the prototypes that lead to various inventions that 100 years from now is why we're able to go back and forth between planets. But that single engineer or that team of engineers is not going to see that outcome, and they know that. They know that they are playing the long game. They know that the work they're doing right now is only getting them incrementally closer. It's just one tiny leap in a massive, massive ocean of difference between where they are now and the change they want to create. So they recognize that. And to some extent, they're okay with that. Because the truth is that change is difficult. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that the change itself cannot be the goal. The change itself cannot be why you are doing it. If you're not going to be around, or it's possible that you won't be around to actually gain that outcome, or even if you are around, it's possible that everything you are trying to do is just never going to work out that way, then guess what? You have to still be willing to show up. You have to still be willing to work. You have to still be willing to put in that effort and make those attempts. So to some extent, you do have to be okay with the idea that you will never see the outcome of what it is you are trying to do. Or at the very least, you may never see the outcome of what you're trying to do. And this is a lesson that the astronauts, the engineers, have sort of lived their lives around. And that brings me to my second point. One of the mindsets they've had to adopt in their career is an understanding that those goals along the way, those milestones along the way, matter just as much, if not more, than the actual potential outcome, right? Because there is a difference between the goal and the milestone that happens sort of in the middle or along the way, and the actual outcome that you are looking for. So for example, you may start a business, and one of your potential outcomes, one of the things that you hope happens from it, is that you make a lot of money, right? Or you disrupt an industry, or you change the world somehow. And that is theoretically possible. It's unlikely, but it is possible, right? That is an outcome that you can pursue. Now, in order to do that, you have all of these goals, you have all of these milestones. Those things, if they don't happen, there is zero chance that the outcome can happen. If those things do happen, then there is a non-zero chance that the outcome can happen. Now, we don't know exactly what the percentage chance is. So much of it is out of your control, but we do know that the actual goals along the way, the practice of doing that thing, matters far more than the actual outcome you are working toward. And that is a critical piece of the puzzle when we are looking at building careers or really any kind of personal development that we may be trying to do. A third really big thing that I took away from this trip is that they recognize that there never really is an end, right? They may have an outcome, they may have a target, there may be this big overarching vision, but at the end of the day, even if they were to reach that, there's always something else. Even if they were to somehow fast forward through time and have all the technology and the problem solved and find a way to get that outcome, to land on Mars, to colonize it, to land on whatever other planets, there's still something more. There's still an entire solar system. There's still an entire galaxy. There's still an entire universe. There's always going to be another target, another outcome. And an understanding of that in your own life at a micro level is incredibly important because it helps us recognize that the outcome itself does not truly matter. The goals along the way do. The practice of doing that thing does. The progress you make along the way does. But the actual outcome doesn't, because the minute you get to it, or even when you get close, there's always something else. Or if you fail to hit it, there's always something else. The actual outcome is truly irrelevant. The thing that you should be spending your time on and focusing on is the progress, the process, the game, The day to day, it's those tiny leaps that you are taking each day that move you forward, regardless of what forward means in that particular moment. A fourth really important idea was this concept of getting value and fulfillment from accomplishing those milestones and those goals, from the day to day showing up. One big thing that kept getting talked about in each of the exhibits, each of the shows that I attended, was this idea of solving problems, right? So you didn't know how to get to the moon, but there were 1,000 problems before that needed to be solved first, right? You didn't just solve how do we get to the moon. You first had to solve, can people survive in space at all? Can you eat? Can you sleep? What effect is that going to have on you? Like, they had to solve all of these other problems first. And the way they did that was small iterations, tiny leaps. They took one problem, tried stuff, found a solution for it, then went to the next one, then the next one, then the next one. And then before they realized it, they'd solved 1,000 problems. And those 1,000 problems allowed them to solve the large problem of how do we get to the moon? But the only way that you can solve that big problem in your own life is by solving the small problems. The only way you can solve the small problems is to focus on the day-to-day, focus on the actual behaviors, the practice that you engage in. It's the doing of the thing. And if that process of doing the actual thing every single day, if that doesn't bring you joy, if you can't find fulfillment in that, if you can't create meaning in that, then you'll never be able to solve the larger problem, even if that's the thing you're passionate about. At the end of the day, you have to be able to find it in that day-to-day practice. Otherwise, you will never be able to move further than where you are now. And then finally, one huge takeaway for me was this understanding that the future doesn't happen unless you lay the groundwork. From my takeaways, every single person who is a part of these teams recognizes the potential, recognizes what that big outcome could be, recognizes what 100 years from now might look like, 30 years from now might look like. They're all ambitious. They're all excited. They all have that vision. They're all using their imagination and trying to create this world. But they fully recognize that that is impossible unless they take the steps now. They recognize that it might take 3, 4, 5 generations to accomplish a particular outcome. They recognize that some goals they will never see the end of because they're just such large, complex problems. But they know, without a shadow of a doubt, that nothing moves forward, nothing happens at all. No one solves the problem unless they start solving the tiny problems now, unless they start taking action and laying the groundwork. And then those things get passed down to the next group and the next group and the next group and the next group. And eventually, you've built on the problems solved by everyone before you to solve the larger problem. Now, the first people didn't get to see that outcome. They don't know what happened. But they persist anyway because they know that it matters. They know what that chain looks like. And the same is true for you. No matter where you are in your life right now, no matter what it is that you are struggling with, what goals you have, what things you want to accomplish, nothing happens unless you start. Now, you may not actually be able to see that particular outcome. Maybe you don't quite make it. But if you can get from point A to point B and then hand that off to your kids, your grandkids from point B instead of from point A, you've allowed them to start in a place that is greater than where you started. You've allowed them to continue that chain. You've allowed them to keep moving forward. So these are just some very quick thoughts and takeaways from my experience. Quite honestly, I think that even if the particular ideas and thoughts don't resonate with you, the approach of looking at the work that you're doing, the life you are building, as this very long journey filled with small wins, tiny leaps, little goals that allow you to move forward, I think that is the most valuable thing that you can get from this. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out today's partner, Four Sigmatic. Head over to foursigmatic.com/tinyleaps. Let them know we sent you. I've been Greg Clunis. Be sure to click subscribe wherever you are tuning in. If you are tuning in over on the YouTube, thank you so much. Be sure to drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. If you are listening to the podcast, I appreciate you. You are an OG, and you mean so much to me. Be sure to tune into the next episode, and remember that all big changes come from the tiny leaps you take every day.